Chapter 27 of Just Stories, the Kind That Never Grow Old by Winfred Hurst, SDS. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Have the King's orders been carried out? That was long, long ago, in the days of dear St. Elizabeth, Queen of Portugal, and it is an old, old story, taken from an account of her life, and as true as a story can be. I am just telling it my own way. There was a model young man at the court of this holy queen. He acted as page and had already won the queen's admiration and confidence, for he was pious, diligent, honest, courteous, a perfect gentleman. No wonder St. Elizabeth gave Juan the preference to all the other youthful pages at her court. Who does not appreciate one that is pious, diligent, honest, courteous, a perfect gentleman? But there was one page at court who was filled with jealousy because of this preference. Diego was his name, and he was a shiftless, good-for-nothing sort of a fellow, with no piety at all, and numerous bad habits as a result. Embittered at Juan's success, he resolved to get him out of the way. In his heart he planned to do an awful thing. Now, Diego, though I do not know why, was the king's favorite. So the king quickly believed him when he came and told him that shameful lie. Which lie? Why, he told the king that he had found out that Juan's attachment for the queen was greater than that allowed by the law of God. Shame on Diego to tell such a shameful lie about one who never even thought about anything not entirely proper. Then the king was filled with great indignation and anger. "He must die," he exclaimed. "He must be put out of the way forever." And Diego smiled complacently as he hastened away. His plans had been well made, his trap was cunningly set, but sometimes one is caught in his own trap. That afternoon the king happened to go out riding. At some distance from the palace, on the other side of a forest, he came across a number of men who were busy caring for huge lime kilns. At the sight of those fiery furnaces, in which limestone is reduced to lime, a terrible thought came to him, for his heart was still raging with hatred against Juan. Calling the workmen to him, he said, "Tomorrow morning I shall send a young man to you with the question, 'Have the king's orders been carried out?' Seize that youth and cast him into the lime kiln to die. Such are your king's orders." "We shall obey, O king," cried the men respectfully. Surely theirs was the strict duty of obedience to their king, and surely the king could put great criminals such as this one must be to death. What did the king do? He called Juan into his presence the next morning and said, in a friendly way, "Juan, go down to the lime kilns and ask whether my orders have been carried out." Immediately Juan signified his willingness to go and started off without delay. But as he passed along the road through the forest, he heard the silvery chimes of a bell from the tower of a little woodland chapel. It sent out the happy message that Mass was about to begin. "I'll just drop in for this Mass, and then I'll run the rest of the way and make up for lost time," Juan thought. Devoutly he heard the Mass, but another Mass followed immediately afterwards, and he heard that one too. That was not, indeed, Juan's way. He would not neglect duty even for prayer, for he knew that duty done for God is the very best kind of prayer. But that day something seemed to tell him that the king was really in no hurry. The voice of his guardian angel, I suppose. And he piously heard the Mass through to the end. Meanwhile the king was anxiously pacing to and fro in his royal chamber. A strange feeling of oppression and uneasiness and guilt filled his soul. He was wondering whether Juan had reached the lime kilns and whether his orders had been obeyed. At last he could endure the suspense no longer. He would send someone to inquire. Just then Diego, Juan's false and malicious accuser, entered with some little message. "Diego," commanded the king, "go at once to the lime kilns at the end of the forest and ask whether my orders have been carried out. Do not delay. The matter is urgent." The young man obeyed with alacrity. Full of hatred, he had been watching and listening eagerly. He had noted the departure of Juan and suspected that some great evil had befallen him. His low, mean heart rejoiced, and, anxious to hear the worst, he made all haste to reach the lime kilns. No sooner had he reached the men in charge of the roaring furnaces than he asked eagerly, Have the king's orders been carried out? Ha! Here at last was the messenger they were commanded to put to an awful death. They seized Diego, and, in spite of his frantic protests that they were making a mistake, that he was the wrong person, they cast him into the hissing flames. In a moment his body was burnt to cinders. Mass in the woodland chapel was over. His heart still filled with the spiritual sweetness of the adorable sacrifice, the pious Juan continued his way to the lime kilns, making all possible haste. Arriving there, he courteously asked the assembled men the question the king wished to have answered. Have the king's orders been carried out? On being assured that everything had been done as the king had requested, he immediately returned to the palace. Juan went directly to the king's chamber. "Your Majesty," he said with a low bow, "the men at the lime kilns request me to inform you that your orders have been strictly carried out." Imagine the king's astonishment at seeing Juan, whom he believed already to have met with a frightful death. You," he exclaimed, "where have you been all the while?" "Forgive me, your Majesty," said Juan humbly. "In passing through the forest I heard the chapel bell ring for Mass. Thinking that you were not in a hurry to receive your answer, I entered the chapel and assisted at the august sacrifice. But another Mass began immediately afterwards, and I so longed to hear that one too, that I stayed, and I remained to the very end. For when my good father was dying, he called me to his bedside and blessed me, and said, 'My dearest boy, always love to hear Holy Mass, and every time you do hear Mass, be sure to hear it to the end.' Forgive me, your Majesty, if I seem to have been disobedient. I did not mean it so." The king was profoundly moved. He already guessed what had happened, and upon inquiry he found that Diego had indeed met with the sad fate intended for Juan. "The hand of God is here," he thought. Thereupon he carefully investigated the charges that had been brought against Juan and found them utterly false. And the result? Juan continued to be the favourite of the queen and of the whole court, and thereafter he was the favourite of the king too. The honour due to his sterling character was given to him by all. Now I wonder who can tell me what brought all this happiness into Juan's life? Can you? End of chapter 27.